All right. Welcome to this lecture. We are going to be talking today about building justice driven research programs, conservation programs, programs in general, actions, studies. And there may be some repetition here in some of the other content that you may have seen throughout the course. But my goal for this talk is to help guide your thinking, your planning, your crafting of your final assignment, whether that's the research study or the conservation action plan, to help kind of make that maybe task that's overwhelming for you right now become a little bit more manageable and kind of walk you through what I expect to see and bringing together some of the lessons throughout the semester or throughout the course to this specific focus. Okay. So if you're thinking, hey, I've already heard some of this, bear with me, okay? You know, here to help, here to try to reinforce lessons. So before we go anywhere, though, let's ask some three questions. Let's ask three questions that are gonna kind of underpin what we're talking about today. So, number one, when does conservation become colonialism, fortress style? When does research perhaps extract value or become parachute science instead of creating change, value, impact for local communities? And when do our solutions, maybe our careful, peer reviewed, well funded solutions that we love, we hold so tight, when do they begin to recreate the exact problems that we're supposed to be solving? Take a second with those because here's the thing. These are not open ended rhetorical questions. They're not philosophical. They're diagnostic. Okay. They are going to tell you whether your work helps or whether it just participates in systems of harm with better branding. Okay. And they're critical questions that you should ask yourself, as difficult as they may be in some situations. There's those questions. It would have been a bit more dramatic if I had changed to that slide when I said those things, but here we are. So let's go back to thinking about traditional research approaches versus what we have been talking about and the focus of environmental justice and environmental justice informed research and work. So again, three numbers. 85% of the planet's biodiversity, well, it exists on indigenous lands. And that's from Garnett's team in 2018, which was a huge multi-country study. It's quite impossible to ignore. Indigenous peoples manage these lands at 1/5 the cost of government protected areas. Schuster documented this in Nature Sustainability in 2019. That's 1/5 the cost, right? You're getting better outcomes, lower budgets. So, what's going on here? Well, less than 1% of global climate finance reaches these indigenous communities. The Rainforest Foundation Norway tracked this in 2021. You see the pattern? Expertise is flowing out of communities, resources is flowing past them. It's benefiting land somewhere else entirely in many cases. And the uncomfortable part is that it's not a bug in the system. It's kind of how things are designed. Okay. So, what actually makes work justice driven, not justice themed, not just branded? So, it has to be actually structured around justice. Three things. And I promise these are more interesting than they sound. But again, we're going back to our friends in the justice dimensions. We have to think redistribution, real stuff, money, power. Who gets to make the decisions, not just symbolic gestures, not participatory theater, not just advisories roles, not just consultation, but actual transfer of control. Again, we have to think about recognition. It's so important. Whose knowledge counts as legitimate? Whose experiences shapes how we even define the problem? If the answer is people with PhDs from US or European universities, you might be making a choice about whose intelligence matters without thinking about it, right? Representation. Who's in the room when decisions happen? Who's holding the pen when the report gets written? Who's invited to attend, right? The secret that's not really a secret is whoever writes the document often wins the argument. Think about historiography. So, frameworks, our friends, these are your tools. Procedural justice, again, are the processes fair? Can everyone actually participate? or is this theater? Is there transparency or decisions made in back rooms? Who's accountable? Or does everyone just shrug when things go wrong? Happens more than you'd think. How are the benefits flowing and the costs? Who wins? Who loses? Classic justice questions. Who decided what's fair? Who even said what fair even means? Do you even know what the community or the group or the stakeholder that you're working with, even how they even define fair? These questions are uncomfortable because they expose whose interests you're actually serving. Recognition, again, a big one. Western science does not have a monopoly on creating knowledge. Traditional ecological knowledge, lived experience over centuries, the way of doing things, taking care of nature, farming before the ivory towers were built. Built over generations. If your research design isn't considering that or reflecting that, I just don't think you're doing the right things. You might be doing colonialism. Restorative justice. Again, this reminds us that we're not starting from zero. Sometimes we're starting from negative. Historical harms have happened. We can't discount those. There might be ongoing extraction, and your work is either going to address that or make it worse. There's no neutral. And this is where we often miss the mark in conservation, in community engaged scholarship, in measuring pollution and harms. We just want to start from day zero. Don't want to go back and look at the history, look at the past. So the practical part, right? How do you actually do this? Well, our friend, many friends in this lecture, but our friend power mapping can be a great place to start before you design anything, before you write any proposal, before you contact anyone. Start thinking about power. You need to know who holds the decision-making power in any system you're about to enter. Where does funding come from? Where does it actually end up? Whose knowledge gets centered in documents and policies? Whose is getting ignored or has been ignored? What's the history between people, institutions, communities? Is there drama? Is there schism, conflict that we need to think about? Do we need to be careful? And again, who's benefiting from keeping everything exactly as it is? I want you to literally draw this, right? Get a piece of paper, map the flows of resources, information, authority. Use arrows, use different colors, make it visual. You have to think in systems because until you can see the systems, the power structure, it's very unlikely that you can change it. You can only reproduce it with perhaps better branding or better intentions. Step 2 is think about how we're going to use genuine co-design, not consultation, not just focus groups, not just a survey, co-creation from day one, community-based participatory research. This space has principles that work, really defined, systematic. Communities participate as equal partners from the moment you're forming the research question all the way through to how you're going to share the findings. This research can address priorities that communities identify themselves, not priorities you decided were important from your office. Knowledge and capacity will stay in the community after you leave. They will meet the needs, desires, and priorities of the folks you're working with. It requires long-term commitment. It's not a 3-week visit where you're going to fly over, take a drive, where you're going to extract some data and disappear. It requires long-term funding too, and to be careful and strategic about that. Some red flags are predetermined outcomes. Talked about that already. Token participation where you already made the decisions. One-time engagement. And if your timeline shows community involvement starting after you've made the core decisions, well, you're doing consultation theater. The community is going to get to watch your work. And that's not partnership if that's what you're looking to achieve. And again, this is not easy. I've fallen into these tropes in my own research. It's not easy to do this work. Be sure that you watch my lecture on participatory research. Again, you're not a villain, but you have to be careful. We want to do no harm. And if we're going to commit to doing truly participatory research, truly justice-informed work, we really want to make an impact for the communities, we have to ask ourselves these critical questions. We have to hold ourselves accountable. Resources and redistribution. This is where it gets real. Resources, the money, follow the money. What percentage of your budget is going directly to community partners with actual control over the spending? That's tough. Not, we'll reimburse you. Control. I mean, are you paying community members equitably for their expertise, or are you extracting their knowledge for free while paying yourself a salary? If you're doing a project that deeply involves folks, do they know what the budget is from the grant? If you have participants who are, let's say, changing their livelihoods, do they know the budget? Do they have any control over it? Do they have any say? Can they access the funds? Or are you just giving them opaque numbers or buying supplies for them and telling them to get to work? I mean, does the work build capacity and does it remain after the project ends, or does just everything stop and collapse the moment funding stops? That's what happens all the time. Say ID, we've seen gone in 2025, just all stopped. It dried up. It disappeared overnight. Gone. Poof. People left without resources, without any knowledge that was going to happen, right? They didn't vote in the US election. They live in different countries. Happens all the time. What about coalition? Well, an example is from the Coalition of Communities of Color. They did research in 2020, and their standard they established is that community partners should control at least 40% of project budgets. And that's a floor, it's not a ceiling. Again, if your budget doesn't reflect power sharing, then your structure doesn't either. I mean, it's quite simple. You can have all the right language in your proposal, but the budget really tells the truth. And this is where, I mean, the environmental space, NGOs, grant makers, we're struggling. We're not there. There are some organizations who do this very well. So again, step 4, we're always going back to recognition and knowledge justice, epistemic justice, right? We have to ask ourselves this. We're in academia, we're doing research. We're working in education. Whose knowledge counts? Who gets to say what evidence means? You should have multiple evidence-based approaches. You should have scientific data, and include lived experience, peer review, and community validation. It's not and or. They're not competing. Different ways of understanding the same reality. California, fire management, perfect example. Indigenous peoples practiced prescribed burning for thousands of years, where you burn specific areas to improve the health of the ecosystem and prevent larger fires, right? Hundreds of fires, adapted ecosystems, and they maintained this through careful and knowledgeable burning. Then colonization happened, the expansion to the American West, and fire suppression became policy. There was a policy that if you saw a fire go up, it needed to be put out by the next morning. 150 years of no burning. Where are we at now? Forests are overgrown. Fire risk is catastrophic. We see degraded ecosystems. And now what do we see every year? Massive, deadly wildfires across the United States. Western science claimed to have discovered the benefits of prescribed burning in 2010s. They discovered it. Remarkable. Now we have co-management agreements with tribal nations. Step in the right direction. It's better than purely technocratic approaches. The knowledge was there the entire time, though. And the question was never, does this work? The question was, do the institutions recognize this as legitimate? Let me give you 2 real cases. These happened. Nepal, community-led forest management in the 1970s. Nepal was facing a deforestation crisis. And at the time, government control was not working. Forests were disappearing. The policies that were put in place were not being managed, were not being enforced. I mean, it was a classic top-down disaster. In the 1990s, Nepal tries something different. They transfer legal rights to community forest user groups. These are not advisory roles. These are legal rights. So communities can now make and enforce their own rules. Well, what resulted was over 22,000 community groups now today managing 2.1 million hectares of forest. Forest cover increased from 26% in 1990 to 45% as measured in 2020. It's a big increase. That's significant. And participating communities reported 35% poverty reductions. Women's leadership and governance became legally mandated. And what changed? Was it the science? Was it the technology? It was power, legal power transferred to communities. They could enforce rules. They captured benefits. They controlled decisions. The knowledge, it existed. What changed was the power. Who held authority? There is a reason that I talk about power a lot. Let's go to a negative case. Another case. Flint water crisis. We'll go back here. I don't have a slide for this, but initial research in Flint, and we've talked about this before, but I don't want to, go on and on, but it's a really stark example. But the research that was done initially followed the extractive pattern, right? Outside researchers showed up. They collected data, they published in academic journals, and they left. There was zero accountability to the community, zero control over the findings. This is extraction. Thanks for your trauma. We'll take it from here, right? The justice-driven response came from residents. They conducted their own water testing. They used their data for legal action and policy change. They control the research questions, the methods, how findings got used. The health monitoring program stayed in communities' hands. And then what happened was actual policy change. We saw infrastructure investment. It's ongoing. It's not fixed. There's still not clean water in Flint, Michigan. But the ongoing community capacity to take that power back and to monitor and advocate was transferred into their own hands. Again, both approaches use similar testing methods, right? The difference came down to who controlled the process, who owned the data. But let's talk about where this goes sideways. So where institutions do what's called justice washing. So one, you can have diversity panels with zero power transfer. Look how diverse we are. Do any of these people make decisions? No. Next. Two, advisory boards without decision-making authority. So you can advise all you want. We'll consider your input. And then we're going to do what we already planned. Three, we have stakeholder engagement that happens after decisions are made. Thank you for your feedback. Unfortunately, the contract is already signed. We're locked into our grant deadlines. Wish we could do something about it. This is the reality we're facing. Also, celebrating representation while maintaining extractive structures. It's just dishonest, right? We have a community member on staff. Are they paid equitably? Do they have authority? Or are they just there for photos, right? 5, one-time payments instead of sustained partnership, right? Just one-off payment. $5,000, we're good to go, right? What's going to happen in the future? We don't know. We'll sort that out as we come. And then publishing about communities without community authorship. It's just the basic you can do, right? Put people in the seat, right? Show their engagement, their participation. Don't just put them in the acknowledgments at the end in the small print. Seek to elevate, to empower folks that you're working in the community to become co-knowledge producers with you, co-researchers. They don't need fancy academic titles or associations. And again, you're going to encounter all of these and you're going to be pressured to implement or ignore some of them, right? I mean, institutions, they love symbolic gestures that don't redistribute power. Budgets are tight. Organizations are often cheap. They want to look good in reports. Being a critical scholar, being an environmental justice-informed researcher, practitioner, and your job is to recognize the difference between structural change and performance. And then work to choose structural change, even when you know performance is easier. And that's where accountability mechanisms come in, right? So how do we build accountability? Well, MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding, are a good start, right? These specify power sharing arrangements in writing, legally binding. You have community advisory boards that follow FPIC best practices. They have veto power, not just input, veto. They can say no, and that means no, right? Equitable authorship policies, just the basics, right? Community members can be lead authors, not just acknowledged with, we think the community of XYZ. Data sovereignty agreements, where communities own their data, they will control how it's used. If somebody wants control, they negotiate terms with the community. Regular evaluations of partnership quality, grievance mechanisms, they assess you, not the other way around, right? They are assessing how they are enjoying their engagement with you and whether it's meeting their standards. And exit strategies that are planned from the jump, right? So if you're going to have to end this project, or you know that your involvement is finite, the funds are finite. So when you leave, what remains, right? The answer is nothing. Well, you didn't build, you extracted. The answer should not be nothing. They have to be established at the beginning, these mechanisms, right? They need to be written into contracts and budgets. They cannot be added as afterthoughts only when someone complains or something goes sideways, okay? And there's tools. We've talked through them in this course. Use this. This can be an assessment tool for your final project or any project or work you're considering, right? Ask these questions. Did affected communities define the problem, or did you define it for them? If you're solving a problem they didn't name, stop. Find out what problem they're actually facing. Question 2, do communities control meaningful resources in this work, or are you controlling the resources on their behalf? Are you making an assumption that community members can't be trusted to manage budgets? Maybe you need to build capacity. Maybe you need to think about that's a gap you need to be supporting. I mean, controlling resources on behalf of someone else can be considered paternalism, just so we're clear, right? Question 3, what's going to happen with the benefits after external partners leave, or is everything just going to collapse? I mean, sustainability is not just about recycling, right? It's about whether your work creates dependency or capacity. Which are you doing here, right? Again, have you even thought about power dynamics? Are they explicitly addressed in your design, or are you, again, pretending that it's all neutral? We're just neutral observers. This is neutral technical work. All research has politics. We've talked about this, right? The question is whether you're honest about them. Very importantly, could this work be weaponized against the community? Could your data, your findings, your recommendation, could it be used to justify harmful policies? Could it be used in retaliation? Could you inadvertently create harm? Are you considering unexpected outcomes? Have you done a risk analysis? I mean, if you're answering no or unsure to these questions, stop. Redesign. The world does not need more well-intentioned harm, right? There's plenty of that already. Stop. Stop the program. Redesign. Don't just keep barreling ahead as the train is clearly running off the tracks. So, what can you do? Well, literally tomorrow, you can cite community-based researchers in your work. You can make sure that your final projects follow these best practices. They're not just a cookie cutter research design or a cookie cutter action plan. You're engaging with the content, you're applying what we've learned, and look for diverse voices, right? Not just academics and institutional affiliations that you're going to base your work off of. I mean, whose knowledge are you amplifying? In research, when you're doing this for real, right, you can contact communities before writing about them. It's a revolutionary concept. I know. In design work, again, map the power before proposing solutions. Draw it out. Show it to people. Ask them if it's right, In budgets, allocate resources for community leadership, not just community participation, right? Leadership means that decision-making authority and compensation will reflect that. If communities do the work, make sure they're getting credit for it. Make sure they're getting paid for it. Prioritize organizations to work with that take community accountability structures seriously and have them already in place. Don't take jobs where you're going to have to build accountability from scratch while also doing your actual work, right? That's very difficult. So again, maybe some of these actions seem small, maybe they seem big. They do compound. Culture shifts through accumulated practice, right? Not dramatic pronouncements. So I'll share some more resources with you in the module that will help you think about these issues, help you consider your work and your final projects and your future. But I mean, think about it right this. The transition from theory to practice, it's not linear. We've talked about this. You're not going to get it right the first time. I didn't. Nobody does, right? You're going to make mistakes. You're going to recreate power dynamics you didn't even see. You're going to center yourself when you were meant to step back. And the question isn't whether you'll mess up. It's whether you're going to build in mechanisms to recognize those mistakes. You need to be accountable for them and be able to actually adjust. Right? That's the difference between extractive work that harms and justice-driven work that builds capacity and addresses root causes. So again, those younger than me, all of us, we're inheriting ecological and social crises that previous generations created or worsened. And you are going to be tempted towards technical fixes that might sound really nice, but they don't threaten the power structures. You're probably going to be rewarded for work that seems innovative, but it's not disruptive. I mean, the system is very good at absorbing critique and turning it into content. I mean, the choice you face is whether to reproduce those patterns or are you going to interrupt them, right? Justice driven work is harder, it takes longer, it requires giving up control, it demands you operate in discomfort in many situations. And it means that communities might reject your ideas and tell you that your presence isn't helpful. But that's the point. If your work can't survive community critique and direction, maybe it shouldn't be done. So, who are you building power for, right? Who benefits from your work continuing? Who benefits from it stopping? Answer those questions honestly. And I think it will be a compass to help you know what kind of work you're really doing.